Welcome to Protect Yourself and Your Assets. This is a masterclass offered by Babiarz and Associates. Today's session is going to introduce us to this topic by focusing upon the sources of various threats to yourself or your assets. We wrote a book about this some time ago, and we called these mischief makers chaos. And whether you call it chaos or simply threats, this is going to be the focus of today's session. And as we go through each session in this masterclass, we will remind you that although we hope you gain much in the way of information, knowledge, understanding, and enlightenment from this masterclass, please remember we're not giving anyone any kind of individualized professional advice. If you do require advice for your particular situation, we always suggest that you consult with members of your professional team, your lawyer, your financial advisor, your accountant. In the first part of this presentation, I'm going to go over 7 categories of, let's just call it misfortune. This is going to include bad stuff like the illness of your spouse, or even good things like retirement, birth of a grandchild. Bad or good things can really turn your world topsy-turvy. As Elvis Presley said way back in 1957, you can be all shook up even if it's from something like love. That can cause chaos in your life. And this is an admittedly non-comprehensive list, but nonetheless, I believe it's a good starting point. So let's talk a moment about what sources I draw upon to define these threats to yourself or your assets. The first source is the social scientists, and there are 2 in particular, Thomas Holmes and Richard Rahe, whose work I've utilized in looking at this. Way back in 1967, they published a social readjustment rating scale. And with this tool, you tally up points for certain life events that happened to you during the last 12 months. The totals then compared against a scale to determine susceptibility to stress-induced health breakdowns. So for example, death of a spouse creates the maximum 100-point addition to the scale, while items such as vacation or minor violation of the law only tally somewhere between 11 and 13 points. And there's other social scientists with similar theories. Secondly, as many of you may know, I retired several years back from many years as a lawyer, a profession that deals with chaos. And although I concentrated in relatively sedate areas, estate planning, estate administration, elder law, asset protection law, I still dealt with a lot of clients who came to me to help solve problems in which they found themselves, and numerous others who wished to prepare themselves in the event issues arose. So in a way, I spent decades as a chaos preparation and recovery specialist. And then sadly, I have some personal experiences here when I found chaos invading my own personal life in a most profound way with my wife Ann's illness and the collateral damage from it back in 2014. So from this personal experience, my legal career, and the insights from social scientists, I find many causes, many threats to you, to your assets, any one of which can really screw up your life pretty good. And ultimately, where is chaos always felt? Yeah, you get hit in the wallet. So if you're already retired or planning for a retirement that's near or far off, you're taking a hit, usually from the pot you're hoping to grow or live off of in your golden years. So in the first part of today's talk, we're going to look at these causes, these threats. And later on then, as we move our way through the rest of the sessions of this masterclass, we're going to look at some ways to prepare and some solutions. But before we jump into this intro, let me give you the number 1 goal of this masterclass. You've already seen on the screen, and I'll reiterate too, that Again, this presentation, these classes, these sessions aren't specific legal, financial, medical, or any other kind of professional advice for your situation. You need to work this through with your lawyer, your accountant, your doctor, your financial advisor, maybe even a plumber or a massage therapist, if you have some kinks in your circumstances. And classes like this can't possibly cover all the nuances and minutiae of life or take into account or speak to all the facts here. But there is a secret to getting the most out of our time together. And I believe it's a secret to how you can effectively cope with or navigate much of day-to-day modern life. And that is, you don't really need to know all the answers. What's more important is to know the right questions to ask. Because if you know the right questions to ask, you can find the answers. And together with these sessions that are being presented to you, you should receive a workbook, and that workbook has exercises within it to help you contemplate some things, generate some more thoughts, maybe generate some more questions, which again is what you should focus on in our time together. Make no mistake, misfortune will present itself in everyone's life. So let's begin by looking at some of the most common sources. And again, this is an admittedly non-exclusive list. I'm going to begin with a story. You know, a toaster oven seems like a harmless appliance, and maybe it's not as popular now as it was back, say, 20, 30 years ago. Back in the 1990s, I was familiar with an employee of a company with whom I did business, and she had one of these appliances, and one day she decided she was going to cook dinner in it. She started her meal, and then she had to leave home to run an errand. When she returned, the flames had already breached the roof of her house. And although the fire department did their best, her residence turned into a total gut job. And of course, yeah, the culprit was the toaster oven. Now, we can debate about whether it was smart to leave dinner cooking unattended, and the devastation that affected the toaster oven lady, which ranged from financial to physical to emotional, is something that can affect all of us, or any of us. I mean, you could be vigilant and turn off all your small appliances when you leave, but you can't steer a hurricane or a tornado away from your property. Around the same time as the toaster oven fire incident, Ann and I went on vacation. When we returned, we discovered that our main sewer line from the house to the parkway had ruptured and, how shall we say it, used water backed up into the lower floor of our tri-level. It's amazing how much damage a couple inches of water can do, especially when it's from the wrong side of your plumbing system. So natural or unnatural disasters, they can be as mundane as a sewer backup, as sudden and ravaging as a fire, or as rare as a lightning strike. Now, Southern Californians are aware of earthquakes. Midwesterners, which is where I came from, knew about tornadoes. I'm now down in Southwest Florida, where we have to keep an eye out for hurricanes. Irma was a really unwelcome guest back in 2017. We bugged out. We were in Mississippi at the time. We're approaching 20 years since 9/11, but there's still news items about further terrorist threats to our safety. Places have ramped up security. Hackers steal our information. There's data breaches. We have cameras everywhere, and we hope the right people are looking at those cameras. But sometimes that information may get relayed elsewhere, where, for example, thieves might know you've left home and it's safe to break into your place. And so whether the strike is from terrorists, lightning, fire sweeping your home, faulty wiring, the potential for damage to life or property from these disasters can be grave. So when we look at this list, fire, floods, thieves, how about a zombie apocalypse? Well, maybe that one's not so much to worry about. What about lightning, hurricanes or tornadoes, earthquakes, blizzards? And this last one on the list, I don't think I need to say too much about. Now, there's preppers who live in secluded properties, trained to operate firearms. They stockpile food and water. I kind of gave up being the rugged outdoors type years ago when I decided I didn't look good in flannel. And I'm certainly not going to give you any advice about how to head for the hills in these masterclass sessions. When we have these disasters, we often first think of our insurance. We may have a magnet clinging to the door of our refrigerator that contains the name and phone number of our agent, but where exactly did the tornado drop our refrigerator? If you're lucky, maybe you can use credit cards to find a place to stay, purchase some clothes, lick your wounds a bit. If your purse got washed away in the flood, you may be calling mom or your BFF for a couch surfing visit. And hopefully the wounds you're licking are only financial or psychological, because the phrase that your health being the most important thing is absolutely true. And I want to explore that threat next. You know, as I've aged, I've lost flexibility. My wife, Ann, spent many years as a fitness trainer, and she encouraged me to embark upon a program of yoga. She said it would help me regain my lithe, boyish frame, and that it would add 15 years to my life. So on the internet, I found about a 30-minute video teaching yoga for seniors or newbies, promising to be gentle. So I stuck with it for several weeks, jimmied my limbs as akimbo as possible. Then, with a kinked rotator cuff, a gimpy knee, and a throbbing groin pull, I had to admit, Ann was right. I felt 15 years older already. So whether your health issues are due to normal aging or sudden illness or chronic illness to you or a family member, or whether it's from an accident, these are threats to your well-being and your financial well-being, because physical problems can lead to depression and anxiety. Mental illness can morph into physical conditions. Mental and physical problems may cause financial ruin. All of these stress your family and your friends to the max. Staying in good health appears to be simple if you believe what you see on TV. Every other commercial is from a drug company. You got smiling groups of family and friends socializing, cartoon characters, and you got a spokesperson portraying illness as something rapidly alleviated with a stroke of a pen on a prescription pad. Then you hear the laundry list of creepy side effects. You know, I'm okay with runny nose, bouts of flatulence, sleepiness. I don't operate heavy machinery usually anyway. But when the announcer cheerily mentions internal bleeding, coma, or death, I wonder if there might not be a better way to treat allergies or corns. And I still can't figure out how 2 clawfoot bathtubs are supposed to help someone with erectile dysfunction. Now, Ann had a crappy 2014 with her illness, and I acted as her caregiver throughout much of that year, and maybe that's another reason to feel sorry for her. We had enormous bills covering care for which insurance did not pay. Our business managed to survive, so we emerged at the end of this ordeal maybe richer in our relationship but poorer in our pocketbooks. Now, when we go back to our 2 social scientists who came up with that rating scale, it has a lot of entries related to health concerns. The ultimate health problem, death, tops the list, with the passing of a spouse adding 100 points to your stress assessment. Death of another close family member is 63 points. Your own personal injury or illness is 53. Change in the health of a family member is 44. Even the clawfoot bathtub problem adds 39 points. As if health problems in and of themselves aren't bad enough, they often create effects in other areas of life. Social isolation, financial strains with costs, and loss of income. Caregiving for a spouse is especially taxing. One of my areas of concentration as an attorney was elder law. I learned much more than I wanted to about such illnesses as Alzheimer's disease and multi-infarct dementia. One terrifying fact that I uncovered is that more often than not, the caregiving spouse passes away before a demented partner. The stress of dealing with a loved one with dementia simply becomes too much. This is really not what we hoped for in our retirement, is it? Further, winding up in a nursing home in the latter days of life is perhaps a huge, maybe the biggest threat to your assets. As an attorney, I counseled many seniors and their spouses on what was known as Medicaid planning. Quite a few of my clients were shocked to find that neither health insurance nor Medicare paid much towards long-term care. And with the costs tallying several $1,000s, sometimes 5 figures a month or more, even a sizable retirement nest egg gets swallowed up rather quickly. And then there's the healthy spouse who could remain at home but needed means to support himself or herself. You can really burn through an entire investment portfolio. Talk about threats. This is one we're going to devote actually almost an entire session to all on its own in this class. And then, while you're dealing with someone sick, there's the morass of claims, forms, tracking of benefits. Not only must the healthcare costs be dealt with, but you also have routine bills. You got to pay those. You got to monitor investments. If these duties used to be the person that now is sick, they're going to fall into somebody else's lap. What typically results from a serious accident or illness is that you are treated by a multiplicity of medical providers. Now you've got to coordinate all of these specialists, obtaining appointments for doctor visits, tests, lab work. It's all got to be in the proper order. You got to make sure that medications prescribed by one doctor don't conflict or counteract with those assigned by another. All of this can really be overwhelming. I can think of nothing that has the potential to create more problems than accident or illness, and health and related concerns, again, are some of the highest point totals on our social readjustment rating scale. A final factor here is whether an illness is sudden or certain. Anne's illness could not have been anticipated. She exercised. She got proper nutrition. She attended to all of her routine medical checkups. She was the picture of good health. Her health crisis came without warning. Then there was my dad. When he retired, he didn't eat right or exercise. His television remote control was me. In fact, there were several years of my life when I was a kid, I thought my first name was Damn It. Damn it, change the channel to 5. Damn it, I can't hear. Turn up the volume. Actually, that's a lie. My dad was terrific, a sweetheart. He didn't treat me that way. If anything, he doted on me and I was a spoiled brat. But his slide into ill health took several years. Sadly, he suffered from what doctors in the 70s termed senility. They didn't really have a better name for it back then. When I look back now, especially with my background in elder law, I think he probably suffered from a series of mini strokes that caused his memory issues. Nonetheless, primarily my mother, and to a lesser extent me, wound up as his caregivers for a long time because my dad stayed at home. My mom really chose not to seek placement. Some keep parents, spouses at home due to financial concerns. That's understandable. Debts relating to health issues can be enormous. But there's other routes to financial ruin, and I'd like to look at this cheery list next. One way to judge how misfortune impacts individuals is looking at what causes the most extreme financial upset: bankruptcy. Now, as I just mentioned, health concerns can drain wallets faster than a 16th century doctor's leeches drained your blood. But medical expenses account for a whopping 40+% of bankruptcy filings. They are the number one cause of bankruptcy in America. It's not someone being careless with credit or running up bills or living the high life here. It's getting sick and not being able to pay for all the bills. And there's collateral effects of medical issues. In addition to paying for care, people dealing with serious or chronic health problems often can't make money. It might be difficult or impossible for the sick spouse to work. It might be difficult or impossible for a caregiving spouse to work or even operate a business successfully. When Anne was undergoing chemotherapy, she met a nice lady, surprisingly upbeat, who was undergoing similar treatments. This particular woman's job was cleaning local office buildings. Her employer's response to her illness: she was fired. Now, she was able to qualify for Medicaid assistance because she didn't have a lot of assets or income, and she didn't need to resort to bankruptcy, but she lost her income. because a health woe makes money go. Of course, we can all heed the words of Mickey Mantle, who once famously said, "If I knew I was going to live this long, I'd have taken better care of myself." When we look at the same bankruptcy statistics, we find that 7% of personal bankruptcies are filed when an individual suffers a natural disaster, such as earthquake, flood, or fire. This is the first category we were talking about. But natural disasters rank only 4th on the BK list. Health is number 1. What comes in at number 2? Well, you probably could have guessed this one. Job loss. Job loss, unemployment, the resultant loss of income. This accounts for 22% of the filings for bankruptcy, trails only health issues in that list. This isn't surprising. Most of us don't save enough. If either spouse gets a pink slip, disaster really looms. In a later session, we're going to look at some of our typical savings rates here in America and some rather sad and shocking statistics. But a loss of a job scores 47 points on our stress inventory, where we're tallying up things to see if you're headed for a health-related illness. Generalized financial worries add 38 more, and cruelly, the hardship of a job loss and the resulting desperation may even cause health problems. This really adds injury to insult in a classic sense. Combine job loss and illness, and you really have maximum chaos. And the unemployed often find that the type of job for which they're most qualified is rapidly disappearing. Good-paying, middle-class jobs seem to be an endangered species. And here's the dirty secret. If you're over a certain age, yeah, there's laws in place, but rest assured that you will often be discriminated against. In the place of the middle-class job, or for older workers trying to find a job, is a whole new class of work. People cobble together contract gigs, or they become solo entrepreneurs. What's going to happen is in the next few years, statistics are showing that more than a half of all American workers are going to be independent contractors. You're not getting a paycheck with taxes taken out anymore. You're getting a check with a 1099 at the end of the year, and you're responsible for your own taxes. Odds are, if you're not an entrepreneur already, you will be soon. This is a trend that we'll come back to in several of our sessions. And whether you call yourself an entrepreneur, independent contractor, contract worker, the fact is you're in business for yourself. And although there's many advantages to being in business for yourself, and we're going to go over those in one of our sessions as well, but running your own show can create a host of possibilities for problems. And I'm going to take a little side tour here and look at a few. Because if you're a free agent, you may rely upon one big contract, one particular client or customer providing virtually all of your work. This is very typical for gig workers. And the temptation to do this is powerful. If you're new to business, having a steady supply of work can jumpstart you, and you'll be profitable almost overnight. But what if the big deal falls apart? If your big contract goes away, so does your income. And you may find over time that the contract is actually a better deal for the company with whom you do business. They're usually a lot bigger. They have a lot more leverage and bargaining power than you do. And sometimes you see in these agreements restrictive covenants. These things, this language, attempts to prohibit you from soliciting or engaging in similar business within a certain geographic area for a period of time after a contract is over, or going after the clients that you worked for on behalf of your contracted party. So at its worst, the big contract is like having a job, except you pay your own expenses and you don't have any benefits. You have no health insurance, no vacation days, no sick days. And if you're ever cut loose, you're not fired. You're just have a contract that's terminated and you can't collect unemployment compensation. You weren't an employee. There's no social safety net for you. The sister to the big contract's the big platform, because you may become dependent upon a large platform to sell your goods or services or market your business or your skills, but you're bound by their rules. They may be disguised under something called terms and conditions, and they change a lot. And trust me, they're not negotiable. This is basically a take it or leave it situation. And if you violate the platform's rules, the big boys in this digital world can close down your business in a nanosecond. And then there's credit. It's difficult sometimes to secure financing for a new business or to help you bridge the gap into your new gig. Sometimes people borrow on personal credit cards. Or even if we're still working at a regular job, we can mismanage credit cards into disaster. Sometimes being a trendsetter involves the risk of government intervention. This hit home for me back in the 90s when I was doing a lot of estate tax planning for quote-unquote wealthier clients, because at that point in time, you owed an estate tax when you hit the $600,000 level in assets, which in my neck of the woods, if you had a decent home, a nice insurance policy, and maybe a retirement plan, it didn't take much to get there. And then the government changed the estate tax law, and a lot of my business went away overnight. And in the latter years of practice, having an estate tax problem was a really nice problem to have because it meant you were a multimillionaire. But it wiped out a lot of work for estate planning lawyers. I know you're all shedding tears for me, right? Not many cry for the poor attorneys. And then as an adjunct to it, from my former profession, hey, if there's a lawsuit involved, if you're a billionaire real estate tycoon, this is another day at the office. If you're a small entrepreneur, it might be your last day at the office. One of the trade-offs we accept for living in a free society is access to the court system. Our American system of justice, particularly on the civil side, affords members of the citizenry the right to seek redress. Is our nation a litigious one? Sometimes that's the perception. A bad result in a lawsuit can end your dreams as a small business owner. Now, you might have purchased insurance to guard against this very suit that's being brought against you, but it's not going to replace the stress that being a defendant in a court action will bring. A lawsuit will take your time. It'll distract you from your business. It'll distract you from your life. And in many parts of the country, it could take years before the suit is resolved. You know, you could wind up spending 5 to 10 years in the court system. If you're 50 years old, a third of your life could be spent fighting a battle such as this. Now, we're going to spend some time on this topic as well and how to protect your assets against lawsuits. And then finally, we have BO. Now, I'm not talking here about a personal hygiene issue. No, I'm talking about burnout. If you get burned out, not only is it difficult to quit your free agency, your gig, your contract, could be dangerous to your clients and to yourself, because with burnout, you perform poorly, or you don't care, or you don't achieve the same results. Sometimes the only way to cure burnout is to remove the source. If you're working, you can give that 2-week notice and go find a different job, or switch fields, or go to school, get other training. But if you're an entrepreneur, it's not always so easy to walk away. Most of the time, you're going to have a complex web of contracts, obligations, plans. That simple 2-week notice isn't going to work. Selling or shutting down a business could take months, maybe years. And if you continue to suffer from burnout throughout that time, your health could be in peril. You could be sued for poor performance or bad results, or your revenues could tail off into the dumpster. Yeah, the life of an entrepreneur isn't all rainbows and lollipops, yet if trends continue, soon more than half of us will be in business for ourselves. And all of these issues can strip you of everything except your good name. But wait, sometimes even your good name is in danger. The famous author, Oscar Wilde, said, "There is only one thing in life worse than being talked about, and that is not being talked about." Of course, Wilde was plying his trade back in the 1800s, way before the internet, Twitter, or grocery store checkout counter magazines. Today we have massive invasions of privacy, just massive. We have fake news. We even have falsehoods being easily spread around about us. Conversely, many today go to great lengths seeking fame. How many people do you know that wanted to be reality TV stars or become a big hit on a YouTube channel? We even see dudes running naked across a football field during primetime television coverage, choosing injury, arrest, or humiliation in their quest for glory. And with conspiracy theories, fake news, and the power of the internet, misconceptions contained within it persist for a long time. Do you believe you heard Al Gore say he invented the internet? It's true that today, it's more difficult to achieve success without inviting some invasion into your privacy through social media. In fact, experts who are teaching those to create businesses in the digital realm say you must share personal things about yourself in order to attract clients. But the statistics of obtaining vast wealth through internet fame, well, those stats are dismal. The odds of injury, arrest, or humiliation are significantly higher. And the reverse here, protecting privacy, protecting private information has become increasingly difficult. As you access the web, cookies are placed on your computer. This tracks your preferences, your interests, all those porn sites you surf to. Take a trip to run errands around town. Fill the car up with gas, visit the ATM, walk in and out of a couple stores, even drive down the road a little bit. You're going to be filmed by multiple cameras throughout much of your journey. And if that wasn't scary enough, there is now face recognition software that by scanning the internet and finding pictures of you can be loaded into systems with these cameras. So as you're walking down the street, if the camera sees you and can focus on your face, it can say, they may know your name, your address, and many personal details about you. Even celebrities who you'd think, hey, it's their business to seek attention, they can tire of what they perceive as intrusions into their seclusion. Barbra Streisand filed suit over an aerial photo of her house that was included in a study of erosion along the California coast. By virtue of the attention drawn to the picture via the legal action she filed, a photograph that had been downloaded 6 times turned into what was called an icon of internet photography, and this led to the term the Streisand effect being coined. So the more you protest to preserve your privacy, the more you might find it slipping away. And we've all seen mugshots of people arrested online. Yeah, most of us don't look good in those orange jumpsuits, do we? Many of these pictures and information will wind up on hundreds or thousands of websites. And it's virtually impossible to remove them. Remember the story of Hercules trying to chop off Hydra's head? For every one he chopped off, 2 more sprung up in its place. And is there anything spookier than a social media page that remains up, frozen in time on the date when an all too young person lost his or her life? Now, I don't see anything about injury to reputation or character on the stress scale that our social scientists provided us. Our parents warned us about it. Even Billy Joel once said, your mother told you all I could give you was a reputation. And my parents always reminded me to wear clean underwear in case I was in an accident and had to go to the hospital. The laws attempted to deal with issues of loss of reputation and privacy. We have legal actions for defamation, libel, and slander, and a more recent invention, the invasion of privacy. These are available in America. These are available lawsuits you can file. Defamation typically splits into 2 types. We have slander, which is generally oral, while libel is generally written. Now, in today's digital world, these categories have blurred a bit. But nonetheless, to defame somebody, you need to be spreading false and defamatory information, something you knew or should have known wasn't true, and making it known to at least 1 or more third parties. And the net effect of this is it's injured the person's reputation. Now, it's really hard to negligently defame somebody. If you in good faith believe you have something here that's true, you can assert this as a defense if you're ever sued for defamation. And if you're a public official or a public figure, so someone in government or someone very famous, it's even tougher to sue for defamation because the law thinks that those who voluntarily enter the public arena are deemed to be subjecting themselves sort of to the slings and arrows that others fire at them. And you can't usually defame the dead. Pursuing someone for invading your privacy is a more recent invention. There's several possible civil actions for invasion of privacy, and these vary from state to state. Sometimes you can sue if someone's taken your name or your likeness without your consent. They were using a picture of you without a consent. Intrusion into seclusion is another privacy cause of action. Disclosure of private facts that are embarrassing to the public can be a cause of action for this, or publicity placing somebody in a false light in the public eye. Now, when I went to law school about 1,000 years ago, I remember one of my law school professors commenting on how difficult all these cases, privacy torts, libel, slander, how difficult they were to bring, much less to win. I mean, his rationale was it's the price you pay for the privilege of living in a free society. We Americans value liberty over ruffled feathers. But if it's your mugshot in that lovely orange jumpsuit on the internet that's spreading around, it's more than an inconvenience to you. You know it's difficult to contain the spread of rumors or vicious information. If you take firm action, you may find yourself boomeranged by the Streisand effect, discovering that more people now know of your issue. So court actions can be problematic. Protecting your reputation, yeah, it can be difficult, but sometimes unscrupulous people attempt to even take the sort of you away from you. Because we've all heard the horror stories where innocent people have had their identity stolen, and it takes them years to recover their good name. The crooks aren't simply emptying people's wallets, they're literally stealing lives. These thieves, they pinch information from driver's licenses, try to get social security numbers from various sources. Now that's the gold mine of identity theft. They sometimes even use stolen medical information to either score surgeries, file bogus insurance claims. They can siphon a bank account dry, even commit crimes or sophisticated financial transactions under a stolen identity. People try sometimes to hop on the identity of a dead person. Again, I mentioned at the outset, one of my areas of practice as a lawyer was estate administration. We had to deal with this topic whenever we handled an estate. Now, our two social scientists who've created that rating scale don't have identity theft on that stress scale. I think in 1967, when they created this, character poaching was probably a rare occurrence. But I can imagine that if they were to amend their inventory, this would rack up a lot of points. It's really a long-lived, high-stress form of chaos. A sister issue stemming from this, and it really draws from our modern use of technology, is the ability for virtually anyone to pinch really your very thoughts. Do you write books? Do you write articles, songs? Do you perform music? Do you paint, sculpt, design? Do you encode software? Do you photograph people, places, or things? If you do any of these things and you intend to be compensated for your efforts, you're going to use the internet in some fashion with respect to what you creatively produce. Now, you may try to protect your efforts with patents or copyrights, but the web has made getting paid and protecting art or music very problematic. I mean, for example, when I look at a web page, my computer technically has made a copy of it. Now, that copy may not exist for a long period of time, but it's a duplication nonetheless. And this is true even if I don't download anything or cut and paste anything. A copy has been made. So how do we make the digital world in which we live in jive with century-old concepts of intellectual property. Congress tried to address this recently, but there's still issues that remain. Musicians are vocal about this issue. Nowadays, consumers don't buy music, very rarely. They rent it. If you go on a streaming service or a download, you are renting music. When you download music, you don't buy it. You license it. Or worse yet, most consumers of music simply expect it to be free. Taylor Swift made headlines with her battle against a streaming service. Neil Young pulled a lot of his catalog from certain online distributors several years back. But the delivery of music via the internet is not going to go away. Authors don't have it any better. 50 years ago, the big problem book publishers were worried about was copy machines. Copy machines were going to destroy the business. Let's fast forward to 2007, and we have author J.K. Rowling. I think she did all the Harry Potter books. In 2007, J.K. Rowling released a book exclusively as a print edition. There were digital copies up and available in less than 24 hours, including versions translated into other languages. And this was stolen from a print edition book, not from a digital edition. I have written a number of books and I've published them, and I see books that I've published pirated, and they're available on websites located in former Soviet republics. Do you think any royalties are coming my way from those books? But there's authors and musicians who feel that anonymity is the bigger menace. The more they become known, the more they're plying their trade, the more likely it is they're going to be paid for what they do. To a creative person, stealing their work is a form of identity theft. I guess at least with your writing, your music, or your art, there's a possibility of some satisfaction that, somebody's at least enjoying what you created. Someone's not going to rip your song or cut and paste your article if they hated it. I really can't think anything enjoyable about having your identity nipped. Maybe if you had a sub 400 FICO score, you might have the last laugh when someone tries to use your identity to get credit. But chaos or problems can come from pleasure as well as pain. And I'm going to look next at some life events that we normally view as good things, as pleasurable things. I sat down to lunch with my friend Bob, and I noticed he had a little medallion hanging around his neck. I asked him what it meant. He said it was from AA and that he was now sober more than 2 decades. I hadn't even known him that long, and the fact that he had an issue at some point with alcohol was just unknown to me. Change programs like Alcoholics Anonymous, even things like coaching formats or spiritual paths, these things may create results that are stunning, life-altering. If you ask someone who sticks with a 12-step program or books a number of sessions with a really good coach or follows a spiritual path, that person will often say he or she's a new, better person. But sometimes from the good can also come chaos. Sometimes these changes are gradual and measured, but sometimes they come suddenly and without warning. We don't have to look any further than sacred texts that speak to spiritual awakenings. Paul in the Christian Bible was a first persecutor of early followers of Jesus, and he swiftly converted to Christianity after being on the road to Damascus. The Buddha was born a prince, and he wandered the countryside and adopted ascetic practices before he reached enlightenment through deep meditation. And those who choose a path of sobriety after years of drinking, like Bob, may need to find a whole new social network, new activities. They've got new lives. Even an effective personal development program sometimes results in the participant adopting new habits, shedding old habits, changing a perspective, changing an outlook on life, changing spiritual roots, changing social activities. Any combination of these factors really upset the life you once knew. So sometimes these threats to yourself or to your assets can come from an awakening, whether it's a sacred one or a profane one, that results in new perspectives, new beliefs, new outlooks. Something genuinely viewed as benign and beneficial can sometimes muddle any man's mantra. And although a spiritual quest is often described as a journey, what about real journeys? Moving from your current residence to a new home can create an enormous amount of stress, confusion, turmoil. Now, moving down the block may not be that radical. What about relocating across country or from first world to third? I think moving, especially over significant distances, is a real stress inducer. Our social scientists with our assessment scale, they do list point totals between 18 and 25 accumulated due to changes in residence, living conditions, social activities. I think this really understates the chaos, the threats, the misfortune, the stress that is created. Oh, sure, maybe all, I'm putting all in air quotes, you need to do is change your driver's license, your voter registration, your mailing address, your utility service, the school district for your kids, which way you turn in your bedroom to go to the bathroom in the middle of the night. Or maybe you need to learn to drive on the left-hand side of the road, or to understand medical terms in Arabic so you can communicate with your doctor in your new country, or to discover that a 300 square foot apartment is considered spacious in your new European country of residence. Now, a move of more than a few miles can upset social networks. Oh, sure, you can keep up via social media, video chat with your former neighbors or your coworkers, but it's not the same as sitting across from your BFF at the local coffee house, is it? And tagging along in your relocation adventure, maybe a spouse, maybe one or more children. How old are the kids? Their stress will become your stress. Then there's those who decide to retire and move somewhere else to enjoy their golden years. Boy, let's combine the stress of a move with the strains of retirement. This can really affect an individual. Now here, our stress scale has it right. Retirement is very high on the scale, coming in at a 45-point tally. Why? Because perhaps nothing alters one's sense of identity more. Maybe a spiritual transformation. This is something Ann Babiarz and Associates deals with a lot with clients who are transitioning into retirement. It's more than just money. It's about meaning and purpose in your life. One of the most common questions asked during an introduction at a cocktail party, after someone says, "Hey, what's your name?" You answer that. What's the second question asked? What do you do? Once there's no longer a earning money kind of thing attached to that answer, a person could be truly lost, because a job or a career is often the first answer to who am I? So when retirement arrives, our whole persona may need to be remade. Some will never make the transition. We hear a lot of stories where a person retires only to fall ill and pass away shortly thereafter. And retirement's no longer a couple years spent fishing with the grandkids for most of us. If someone lives to the typical retirement age of 65, they may have another 20 years left. Our institutions are not prepared for this mass of retirees, clad in checkered shorts, black socks, and sandals, invading every nook and cranny of America. When Social Security was first enacted, the life expectancy was shorter than the initial retirement age of 65. And what's the dirty secret of Medicare? It's a rousing success. We live longer and better, but we may not know who we are or what the heck to do with ourselves. Socialization remains important during latter years of life. Too often, couples move 1,000 miles to a better climate, knowing no one and intending to start over. And then there's the irony of our digital world, where you can accumulate hundreds or thousands of friends on a social networking site and you really don't know any of them. The in-the-flesh friends you make throughout your life may be related to your job. Once you no longer work, your work buddies will likely drift away. So these 3 R's, retirement, relocation, reawakening, they're typically things viewed as happy and beneficial. But with this pleasure can come pain, and it's a virtual guarantee you're going to experience at least one of these sources or threats during your time here on earth. How do you prepare for these times? It can be key. These three are also intimately entangled with your relationships. Your significant other and your immediate family impact your life perhaps more than anything or anyone else. These folks are my final source of threats to yourself and your assets. Now, one of the things that can help you navigate your way through a lot of these problems is a supportive spouse or family, but sometimes the very people you might hope would help you see your way through the gloom and doom are really the cause of it. Every generation of pop music since the beginning of time has love gone wrong songs. Oh, maybe not Gregorian chants, but we know that 300 years ago, Mozart has issues with the ladies. Country music couldn't survive without songs about failed love. It would just be tunes about beer, trucks, and prison, right? Now, additions or subtractions to your family unit, whether by marriage, divorce, separation, death, permanent disability, child leaving home, a child returning home, all these things create emotional, financial, social issues. Even happy occasions, marriage or reconciliation, pregnancy, childbirth, marriage of a child, birth of a grandchild. These are stressful. And the sad times, death or disability of an immediate family member, upset all but the sociopath. There's a reason why the stress scale tops out with the death of a spouse. Add to that divorce, marital separation, death of a close family member, and marriage, and you have 5 of the top 7 stress-inducing life events. We have helicopter parents, boomerang children. Sometimes we have multiple generations of a family living under one roof. The image of the middle-aged guy still living with mom is no longer a strange one. These individuals were once denounced as mama's boys, socially defectives, or even scrutinized as potential serial killers. These scenarios now elicit no more than a yawn. Besides, the more likely problem is the kind gentleman next door who tends his garden, keeps a cat, and brings his wife's cookies to you at Christmas. You wake up one morning to discover he's murdered his wife and kids and has body parts buried in his crawl space. Well, I jest, and serial killers aside, changes to family structure can have profound effects. This is another area where your odds of undergoing one of these stressors is overwhelming. Because if you marry and stay that way, one of you will wind up attending the funeral of the other. Now, that's a sad truth. It's also one of the most damaging forms of stress visited upon us. With marriage, we may deal with issues of separate assets, blended families, multiple residences. We have the blended family situation with stepchildren, sort of the Brady Bunch situation. But in addition to stepchild, step-parent interactions, there's additional worries over whether if we have 2 different sets of children, will they play nice together? In my years as an estate planning attorney, blended families presented a lot of challenges, and I often dealt with clients whose spouse died. But I believe that a parent prematurely burying a child may even be worse than the passing of a spouse. This situation is often unexpected and frequently tragic, and one to which I think our social rating scale sadly undervalues. Estate planning, when I was doing it, was always a complicated dance between a person's wishes and practical concerns, and if it wasn't handled correctly, it can tear a family apart and create fodder for litigation once the parent passes. We're going to look at a lot at estate planning in this masterclass, and I hope you'll get a lot of valuable information from it, because families don't always get along. Remember when Dickie Smothers would complain to his brother Tommy that Mom always liked you best? Well, sometimes that's true, and sometimes it's for legitimate reasons. But it can also cause problems. And changes in our economy make boomerang children more likely, and there seem to be more kids who never leave home in the first place. Hopefully by now they've taken down the teen idol heartthrob posters and replaced the linens imprinted with cartoons or science fiction characters. And we don't have time to even scratch the surface about what alcohol and substance abuse do to relationships. But it's true that relationships bring with them their own unique sets of joys and heartaches. Well, I hope you enjoyed, in some grim fashion, this presentation of the 7 sources of potential threats to yourself and your assets. Up next, in our next session, we're going to talk about protecting your accounts, protecting yourself from identity theft, protecting your reputation, even understanding how an awareness of your surroundings can be protective of yourself and your assets. We'll look at solutions to these issues, and again, ideas for you to generate your own solutions, your own questions. Again, this isn't going to always provide all of the answers for you. But what we do know is, as John Lennon said, life is what happens to you when you're busy making other plans. Now, with this masterclass, you've been given a workbook. Exercise 1 in the workbook is best done before our next session. And in the interim, in between sessions, because we're talking about things that sometimes get a little personal, I've found that the best way to address questions is to email me. You can reach me at michael@annbabiarz.com. It's up here on the slide. I don't mind questions in between. And while I'm no longer giving legal advice, I'm happy to be a resource for you and happy to respond to your questions if you have any in between our sessions. So until next time, be well and bye for now.